Picture this. You're a sailor in World War II. It's dark. You're scanning the horizon. And then you hear it. Not an explosion, not an alarm. A song. A haunting, mechanical melody rising from beneath the waves, getting louder and louder and louder. And you realize that sound is coming straight for you. Now, if you're thinking, wait, wouldn't a singing torpedo be the worst idea ever? Congratulations, you have more common sense than an entire division of Japanese naval engineers. But here's the thing, they knew exactly what they were doing. And today, we're diving into one of the strangest weapons ever conceived, a torpedo that announced its arrival like a deranged ice cream truck of death. This is the story of Japan's singing torpedoes. And trust me, it's weirder than you think. Let's set the scene. It's the 1940s. The Japanese Imperial Navy is, well, they're in a bit of a situation. On one hand, they've got some brilliant engineers and a proud naval tradition. On the other hand, they're fighting basically everyone in the Pacific. Resources are tight, and desperation breeds creativity. Sometimes beautiful creativity, sometimes the kind that makes you go, wait, what? And Japan had a reputation for experimental weapons. I'm talking about the kind of stuff that makes modern military planners nervous just reading about it. Human-guided torpedoes, the Kaiten, submarine aircraft carriers, balloon bombs that literally drifted across the Pacific on wind currents. These weren't just throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what stuck. This was throwing armed spaghetti that sometimes exploded. So when someone in a meeting said, what if we made a torpedo that sings? Nobody immediately threw them out of the room. That's the world we're dealing with here. Here's what people don't understand about wartime innovation. When you're losing, when resources are scarce, when conventional methods aren't working, you get weird. The Japanese Navy was facing increasingly sophisticated Allied detection systems, better sonar, more experienced crews. Every advantage mattered. Every edge counted. And in the submarine warfare game, the psychological component was massive. A torpedo doesn't just need to hit. It needs to make the enemy react. Panic. Make mistakes. Turn into the path of destruction instead of away from it. So somewhere, somehow, an engineer had a thought that would change underwater warfare forever, or at least make it significantly more disturbing. All right, let's talk about what we're actually dealing with here. These weren't torpedoes with little speakers playing La Marseillaise. We're talking about weapons that produced a powerful, droning sound, something between a mechanical howl and a sustained note. Witnesses described it as haunting, unnatural, like machinery screaming underwater. The sound came from a combination of factors: the engine design, cavitation bubbles forming and collapsing around the propellers, and specific vibration frequencies. Imagine a tuning fork the size of a telephone pole, wrapped in explosives, heading your way at 40 knots. That's the basic concept. And here's the kicker. This wasn't entirely accidental. While the initial acoustic properties might have been a byproduct of the design, Japanese engineers recognized what they had and leaned into it. They didn't try to silence these things. They amplified the effect. Now, I'm not a torpedo engineer. Shocking, I know. But the basic principle is fascinating. When a propeller spins fast enough underwater, it creates areas of low pressure. Water vaporizes into bubbles. Those bubbles collapse. Each collapse makes a tiny sound. Multiply that by thousands per second. Add in engine vibrations resonating through the torpedo's metal body, and you get a soprano from hell. The Japanese experimented with propeller blade shapes, engine mounting points, and even the torpedo's external casing to enhance this effect. Some reports suggest they tested different notes to find which frequencies were most disturbing to human ears underwater. Let that sink in for a moment. Military engineers sitting in a lab, testing which pitch of doom was most psychologically effective. No, Lieutenant tried in C-sharp minor. Really lets the existential dread breathe. Imagine you're on a destroyer. Your sonar operator picks up something. Standard procedure. You're tracking it, preparing countermeasures. But then, everyone hears it. Not through instruments, through the hull. A deep, resonating moan that makes your teeth hurt and your spine tingle. Your training says stay calm, execute protocols. Your lizard brain says ancient ocean demon, abandoned ship. That's the weapon's real genius. It bypassed rational thought and went straight for primal fear. But why? Theory number 1. Psychological warfare on steroids. The most obvious explanation: these torpedoes were designed to terrify. And not just, oh no, we're being attacked terror. We're talking deep, instinctive primal fear. Sound underwater is different from sound in air. It carries farther, penetrates deeper, and your brain processes it differently. A sound in the water doesn't just enter your ears. You feel in your chest, your bones, your skull. The Japanese understood this. The goal wasn't necessarily to hit every ship. It was to make every sailor hesitate, to fill enemy crews with dread, to make them second-guess their training. And here's the beautiful part. The torpedo didn't even have to be aimed at you specifically. If one singing torpedo passed within audible range of a convoy, every ship in that convoy now had a crew on edge. It's psychological warfare at its most efficient. One weapon, multiple targets affected. Theory number 2, the confusion tactic. But there's another angle, one that's actually pretty clever. That sound? It made determining the torpedo's actual trajectory nearly impossible. See, experienced sonar operators could usually track a torpedo and predict its path. But the singing torpedoes created acoustic chaos. The sound bounced off hulls, reflected off the ocean floor, scattered through water layers. Trying to pinpoint the actual threat was like trying to find one specific person in a crowd where everyone's shouting. Captains had to make split-second decisions. Turn hard to port, hard to starboard, full ahead, I'll stop. And that haunting sound gave them just enough information to know they were in danger, but not enough to know exactly where from. It's like being hunted by a predator that wants you to know it's there, but not where there is. Absolutely nightmare fuel. Theory number 3, the maneuver trap. Here's where it gets really devious. What if making noise wasn't a bug? It was the entire point. Think about it. The ship hears that sound. Panic sets in. The captain orders evasive maneuvers. The ship turns hard, presents its broadside, disrupts the convoy formation. And suddenly, what was a well-organized defensive position becomes a chaotic mess of ships trying not to collide with each other. And that's when the real attack happens. The singing torpedo, that's the distraction. The actual killing blow comes from conventional torpedoes launched at targets that just broke formation. It's the underwater equivalent of throwing a firecracker at someone's feet, so they'll run exactly where you want them. Except instead of a firecracker, it's a 3,000-pound explosive that also happens to be serenading you. Theory number 4, the happy accident. But here's my favorite theory, and honestly, probably the most accurate one. It started as a complete accident that someone turned into a feature. Picture this. A submarine commander surfaces after an attack, debriefs his crew. So, did anyone else notice our torpedoes sound like banshees? Everyone looks at each other. Someone says, yeah, and the enemy seemed really freaked out about it. Cue the light bulb moment. Japan was experimenting with faster torpedo engines, new fuel mixtures, different propeller designs. Some of these produced weird acoustic signatures. And then someone noticed, hey, when we use the noisy ones, enemy ships panic more. Maybe that's not a problem. The Japanese Navy wasn't above turning a flaw into a weapon. They'd done it before. The long-lance torpedo had oxygen-based propulsion that left almost no wake. That was partially intentional, partially lucky accident. Same thing here. So they stopped trying to silence the problem and started asking, how do we make it louder? Now, the million-dollar question. Did this insane idea actually work? Short answer, sometimes. And sometimes in warfare is honestly not bad. There are documented cases of Allied sailors reporting mysterious singing sounds before torpedo attacks. Some ships broke formation. Some captains made poor tactical decisions because they couldn't determine threat direction. The psychological impact was real. Crew morale took hits. Sailors became jumpier. And in one reported case, a destroyer's crew nearly abandoned ship because they were convinced they were being circled by multiple singing torpedoes when, in reality, it was just one, and the sound was echoing. One weapon, multiple psychological casualties. That's actually terrifying efficiency. But, and this is a huge but, the singing torpedoes had some pretty significant downsides. First, they announced the submarine's position. Stealth is pretty important when you're a submarine. It's kind of the whole job description. When your torpedo is singing "Here I Come" at full volume, every destroyer in a 5-mile radius knows approximately where you fired from. Second, experienced crews adapted. After the initial shock wore off, veteran sailors learned to use the sound to their advantage. If you can hear it, you can track it. Some captains got good at using the acoustic signature to time evasive maneuvers more effectively. Third, the sound worked both ways. Allied submarines started listening for them too. A singing torpedo meant a Japanese sub was in the area and had just given away its hunting ground. The singing torpedoes were effective as a surprise weapon. First time, absolutely devastating psychologically. Second time, still pretty scary. 10th time, more annoying than terrifying. They were like a jump scare in a horror movie. Great the first time, diminishing returns afterward. And in warfare, you can't rely on gimmicks indefinitely. But here's the thing, they didn't need to work forever. They just needed to work long enough to create chaos, force mistakes, and give Japanese submarines an edge during a critical period. And by that measure, they succeeded. Why they stopped singing? So if they worked, even partially, why did Japan stop using them? Reason number one, resources got tight. By 1944 to 45, Japan was losing. Badly. Oil was scarce. Steel was scarce. Torpedoes themselves were becoming precious. The singing torpedoes required specific engine configurations and modifications. That meant more complexity, more resources, more manufacturing time. When you're struggling to build enough torpedoes, you don't have the luxury of building fancy torpedoes. The Navy shifted to simpler, more mass-producible designs. Singing was nice, existing was better. Reason number two, the Allies got better. Allied sonar technology advanced rapidly during the war. Early systems were crude, good for detecting submarines, less good for torpedo tracking. But by 1944, Allied destroyers had sonar that could not only hear the singing torpedoes, but use them to triangulate submarine positions with frightening accuracy. The weapon that was meant to cause chaos became a liability. Japanese submarines started getting depth-charged immediately after firing singing torpedoes because they'd essentially fired a giant "we're here" signal into the water. Reason number three, tactical evolution. Warfare evolves quickly. What works in 1942 might get you killed in 1944. The Allies developed convoy tactics specifically designed to counter acoustic threats. Designated anti-submarine escort ships would actively listen for unusual sounds and immediately respond. The singing torpedoes went from innovative terror weapon to predictable nuisance. That's the problem with gimmicks. They only work until people figure them out. Reason number four, desperation shifted priorities. In the final years of the war, Japan was developing weapons of desperation. Kaiten human-guided torpedoes, kamikaze aircraft, suicide submarine. The focus shifted from clever psychological warfare to how do we inflict maximum damage with minimal resources. Singing torpedoes were too subtle for a military in its death throes. They wanted guaranteed hits, not psychological warfare. The innovation that defined early war Japanese naval tactics gave way to brutal, direct methods. So the singing torpedoes vanished. The war ended. Japan lost. Story over, right? Not quite. Because the idea, the concept of using acoustics as a weapon, that didn't die. It evolved. Today's militaries absolutely use acoustic warfare. Not singing torpedoes, obviously, but the principle is alive and well. Acoustic decoys, devices that mimic submarine sounds or torpedo signatures to confuse enemy tracking. These are direct descendants of the create acoustic chaos principle. Sonar jammers, systems that produce noise to mask real sounds. Same concept, modern technology. Psychological warfare through sound. Militaries still research which frequencies cause discomfort, disorientation, or fear. The Japanese weren't wrong about sound's psychological impact. They were just early. The singing torpedoes represent something important in military history: the willingness to weaponize the unexpected. Not just physical damage, but perception, psychology, emotion. Modern militaries study this stuff religiously. How do you make an enemy hesitate? How do you create doubt? How do you turn a weapon into a force multiplier by making your opponent think they're facing something worse than they actually are? The singing torpedoes were crude, but they were pioneers. They asked, what if we made war weird? And weird works, at least for a while. Here's the funny part. Japan's experimental weapons programs, the singing torpedoes, the balloon bombs, the submarine carriers, they all share something. They were innovative, creative, sometimes brilliant, but they were also symptoms of a military that was losing and knew it. Winning militaries don't need singing torpedoes. They have enough regular torpedoes to win anyway. It's the desperate, the resource-starved, the outmatched who innovate wildly. And that's both inspiring and tragic. These engineers were brilliant. They were also building elegant solutions to a problem that couldn't be solved. Try to win an unwinnable war. So, singing torpedoes, a weapon that announced its presence. That turned a flaw into a feature. That terrorized sailors, confused sonar operators, and ultimately became too clever for its own good. They didn't win the war. They didn't change the course of naval combat forever. But they represent something fascinating. The moment when warfare got weird, when engineers looked at the rulebook and said, okay, but what if we tried this? And for a brief moment in history, the ocean was full of weapons that sang their way to their targets. Think about that. Somewhere in the Pacific in 1943, there were torpedoes serenading the ships they were about to destroy. That's simultaneously the most terrifying and the most absurd thing I can imagine. War is often described as the ultimate test of innovation. But the singing torpedoes teach us something else. Innovation isn't always about bigger, faster, stronger. Sometimes it's about being so weird, so unexpected, so absolutely bonkers that your enemy doesn't know how to respond. And maybe that's the real legacy here. Not the acoustic principles or the psychological warfare tactics, but the reminder that in the darkest moments, human creativity can produce the strangest things. Sometimes those things are beautiful, sometimes they're terrible, and sometimes they sing. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of WWII's strangest weapons, hit that like button. And if you want more weird history content, subscribe. Because trust me, we're just getting started. See you in the next one.